Hello, everyone. It's great to see people starting to join. So we're just going to wait a few little minutes while we get a few more people joining, but it's really great to see everyone signing on right on time. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Susan Hungar from the CIPS New South Wales Branch Committee, and I'm going to be hosting the seminar today or the webinar today. So we've got quite a few people joining, which is fantastic. So I'm just going to say hello to everyone, and we'll just see how many we've got going now. Yep, we're definitely getting quite a few people. People are saying hello on the chat, which is fantastic. All right, I'll get started now. So I would just like to say hello and welcome everyone to our CIPS New South Wales branch webinar on the topic of procurement with purpose, supporting women-owned businesses. Allow me to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of all the different lands that we are joining from today. In my case, I'm on the country of the Bidjigal people of the Darug Nation, and I pay my respects to elders of all nations, past, present, and emerging. I would also like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us on the webinar today. We have a great turnout for this webinar with more than 80 participants registered, so clearly there's a considerable amount of interest in this topic. Now, for those of us who don't know our organization, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, or CIPS, is the global professional body for procurement and supply professionals, dedicated to promoting best practice, continuous improvement in professional standards, and raising awareness of the contribution that procurement and supply management can make to organizations. We believe that procurement has a role in driving social change, and this webinar gives us the opportunity to explore that further, particularly the positive impact that we as procurement professionals can make. So today's webinar on the topic of procurement with purpose, supporting women-owned businesses, and the role that procurement professionals can play in this space. So the intent of the webinar is to inspire you to lead by example in your organizations by engaging with and procuring from women-owned businesses. So just before we begin, we've got a few little housekeeping notices. I'd like to advise everyone that this webinar is currently being recorded and will be made available to all attendees next week in the CIPS YouTube channel. Your audio and video is blocked, but any chat items or questions may be published. So obviously, consider the professional nature of those. Thank you. Now, the webinar is going to run like this. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to speak for a few minutes about the topic, and then we'll have some time towards the end of the webinar for audience questions, but you can be putting your questions to us and also participating in chat with other participants on the webinar. So just to reiterate that, we actually have two different communication channels in this webinar. We have the Q&A channel and we have a chat channel. So what we'll ask you to do is to put your questions in the Q&A channel and put any comments, general comments you have in the chat channel. And if you don't know where those are, if you scroll across the bottom of your screen, just roll your mouse, they're sort of floating items. And so they might disappear for a while, but you can always just roll your mouse over the bottom of the screen and the Q&A channel and the chat channel should come up again. So what we'd like you to do too is indicate whether your question is for any or all of the panelists or for a specific panel member. And if we can't get to all the questions in this session, we will add them to our New South Wales branch LinkedIn group, which I hope all of you will either join if you're not already a member or jump in at some point after this webinar just to check what sort of conversation that we're continuing in there. And there will be details for how to join that group at the end of the webinar. So if you just want to test the chat channel, can you please type in your name, your organization, and if you know the name of the First Nation country that you are on at the moment, please pop that into the chat channel as well. So we'll just take a minute to see how people are going with that. Got a few people putting all their messages in, some from Melbourne, some from Sydney, some from Brisbane, Gadigal land. Excellent. A Wabaco country. Yep, more Darug. Yep, Camarego. Excellent. It's nice to see that people do know what country they're on. All right. You can continue, as I said, to keep joining us on the chat. And again, as any questions come to mind, please pop them in. As I've mentioned, we're going to have a chat with each of the panelists first, and then we'll have all the questions at the end of the webinar, or towards the end of the webinar. So I would like to introduce and welcome our panel for today. We've got some really wonderful people who are very knowledgeable in this particular area of procurement with purpose and also with supporting women-owned businesses. So first of all, we have Alanna Bastin-Byrne, who is the director of Femeconomy. Obviously, she's going to be talking about that today and other aspects of working with women-owned businesses. Then we have Joanne Kennett, who is the Senior Manager, Inclusion and Diversity Strategy at Westpac. And we've got Dave Andrews, who's the procurement lead for Australia and New Zealand at Microsoft. So I think we're really well placed to have a great conversation with each of them today. So, Alanna, may I start with you? Please tell us about Femeconomy and women-owned businesses and how procurement professionals can be involved with all of that.
I'd love to, Susan. Hi, everyone. So Femeconomy educates consumers, budget owners, and business owners on how their purchasing decisions can create gender equality. So Femeconomy certifies women-owned and led businesses, and we make this list publicly available. We then connect those businesses with purchasing opportunities and also give them ideas on ways to reach new markets. So there's around 1,500 companies listed on Femeconomy, and of those, we would say over 850 are Femeconomy certified. So what does that Femeconomy certification mean? So we look at the leadership of the company, so whether the company has 30% women on the board of directors or is 50% female owned. We often get asked the question, why 30% on the board of directors? And that's because it's a really important first step. Research shows that when you have 30% women on the board of directors, that they're actually heard in their own right, rather than simply representing the minority. And that's why the AICD had that as a target for the ASX 200. The 50% female ownership is also, quite culturally significant in Australia. So what we find with lots of our network is that women are often in business with men. So whether that be their husbands or partners or friends, brothers, sons, and it's really important to them that that ownership is equal. So these are companies that don't just talk about having women in leadership, they actually have women in leadership. And as we know, culture is led from the top. So those companies are more likely to have workplace flexibility, more likely to have parental leave, less likely to have a gender pay gap, more likely to employ other women. So actually they are helping gender equality in communities on a population basis for their organisation. And that gender equality helps women and men. So I'll give you some stats on women-owned businesses. So they are really growing in numbers. According to the ABS, there has been a 46% increase in the number of women business operators over the past 2 decades, which compares to 27% of male-owned businesses. So women are starting their own businesses to continue their participation in the workforce, to use their skills and training and education to really develop those flexible working models around their caring responsibilities. And, it's working. They're really satisfied. They have really high levels of satisfaction. The research shows that 57% were pleased or delighted with the quality of their lives, and 30% mostly satisfied. The Hilda survey, which is the Household Income and Labour Dynamics survey, found across 10 years of data that self-employed women had higher job satisfaction than all other female workers. And this group is also really diverse. So, if you're looking at various diversity targets, then, look no further than women-owned businesses. So 44% of women business operators are aged 40 to 54. A third are born overseas. 0.6% are owned by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. 31% are regional, and 12% had a disability, compared to 20% of Australians having a disability. As is often the case, the parenting and income earning roles are again combined by women when they run their own businesses. So they are also more likely to have children. 81% of women business operators have children of any age, compared to 57% of female employees. 6% look after someone with a disability, compared to 4% of women employees, or 1.4% of men. So, why do all these fabulous, diverse businesses need help when it comes to procurement opportunities? Globally, they access less than 1% of procurement opportunities. And in Australia, they're 34.8% of businesses. So that gap, is actually presents an opportunity to create that social and economic impact. One barrier experienced by women-owned businesses is the legacy networks. So, they'll be accepted onto panels, they'll provide quotes, the quotes will be value for money, but they don't have those key relationships with the buyers in the business. And I know Joanne and Dave will talk a little bit about that today, but we would also encourage, to have supplier forums where suppliers can actually meet buyers in your organisation. Another barrier is unconscious bias. So when it comes to women-owned businesses, many people think, oh, well, they make bath bombs and are nail technicians, but actually it's a lot broader than that. So the majority of our members are established firms that have been operating for over a decade and have employees. And they range from beef exporters to professional services to software as a system platforms and, other areas. I guess within that unconscious bias is also the perceived risk when you buy from women-owned businesses and that they aren't value for money. But in Australia, again, over 10 years, an ABS study found that there was no significant differences in financial performance when you looked at men compared to women's businesses. And women were just as likely to have multiple contracts underway. So my advice for those on the call, on the webinar today, would be to just include one women-owned business with every quote or tender. And that's why we make the data on Femeconomy publicly available. We want it to be frictionless for you. But if you are considering to include women-owned businesses as part of a broader social procurement framework, I'm sure many of you are aware the social procurement in Australia has been led by the Indigenous procurement policies, and what a difference they have made. Those policies mean that Indigenous businesses contribute over $1 billion to the economy every year. And I just think, what impact could women-owned businesses make? Did you know that a business with a female founder and a female executive will employ 6 times more women? So governments are trying to find ways to increase women's workforce participation, help their economic security, particularly with the backdrop of COVID, and women-owned businesses are part of that solution. And I just want to let you all know that gender equality procurement is not a new thing. So in the US, supplier diversity has been legislated and systemised for over a decade. The benefit for companies is they receive tax breaks if they buy from minority or women-owned businesses. The US government itself has a target of a 5% spend with women-owned businesses, and they set that target in 1994. In Australia, the Workplace Gender Equality Agency has introduced gender equality procurement principles as part of its employer of choice citation. So those that are on the call that have that citation, I would encourage you to have a look at that. And EY also released a report in June calling for procurement laws in Australia. And I see Amy Crooks is on the webinar today. And they also recommended Australian businesses think about a 3% spend with women-owned businesses. So the benefit to Australia is that when more women work, economies grow. But really, we're in our infancy in Australia when it comes to this conversation. And thankfully, we have companies like Westpac and Microsoft, people like Joanne and Dave, who are leading the way, showing how it can be done. And they both approach it very differently. And I hope they share that with you today. So Susan, I'll hand back to you. Thanks.
Great, just that little minute when you try to get yourself unmuted and get the video on. I guess everyone, we all probably need those t-shirts in the last 18 months that say you're on mute, all the silly names that we have. So I will try my best not to have to wear that t-shirt today. So that was great, Alanna. I mean, really interesting. I'm already making some questions of my own and some comments that I'd love to add in our Q&A time, and I hope that our other colleagues on the call will also be ready to put in some questions and comments. And of course, my heritage is from the US, and so I didn't even realize myself all those efforts that have been made to support women-owned businesses there. And I guess, and it's really great to know that 6% or 6 times more women are likely to be employed by businesses that have women at the helm, the founders and the directors. And I suppose I could give a quick shout out. I'm not sure if anyone is a fan of Meghan Markle here, but you might have noticed that for her 40th birthday, she sent out a big, tweet or whatever to all her friends about helping women get into the workforce. So it's really great to know that, connecting with women-owned businesses in your procurement space will also maybe help you to use that as that network to help other women get employed as well. So sorry, I'm always going to jump in with my own little thoughts on these things, but thanks so much, Alanna. And I know we'll come back to you very soon with some questions and more comments and things. So having said that, let me now invite the wonderful Joanne Kennett to have a bit of a chat with us about the work she's been doing and sharing some of her insights on her journey with procuring from women-owned businesses.
Thank you, Susan and Alanna, and welcome everybody. We're really excited that you're here today. Although I have worked in procurement for a really long time, far too long probably, my current role really allows me to dedicate myself to social procurement. I help businesses become suppliers to Westpac, focusing on those owned by people from traditionally disadvantaged groups or those with a social or environmental mission, recognising that there is intersectionality across those definitions, and Alanna covered some of those in her presentation. This role is so wonderful. I get to talk to so many women-owned businesses and explore ways that I can help them do business with a large corporation. I have 5 main strategies that I want to share with you today in order to try and make this happen. Number 1, looking for opportunities for those businesses to become suppliers to Westpac. Number 2, driving internal awareness, helping people internally understand the why and the how. Number 3, working with suppliers to help build their capability and capacity so they can adequately and appropriately supply to Westpac. Number 4, looking for ways to embed procurement from women-owned businesses into our procurement processes. And number 5, the reporting on what we do to help raise the profile and celebrate this important initiative. I'll run through how I go about implementing each of these strategies, so hopefully our audience can get some ideas of what they can do in our organisation. The first one, looking for opportunities. This is a bit like a matchmaker role. I understand what it is that we buy within Westpac and what it is that women-owned businesses sell. Plus, I have a good understanding or know who to ask as to where we are on the procurement life cycle. What I mean by this is, have we just awarded a contract for 3 to 5 years, or is there an opportunity coming up that we can explore? This way I can help be efficient with their time and my time in internally promoting businesses at the right time. I have found that many of the women-owned businesses which might seek my assistance are small. They don't necessarily have the resources to promote themselves widely. So I help do that for them. The way I might do this is a simple introduction to somebody in the business, or lobbying their capabilities and promoting them to help them get onto a tender list for work coming up. An additional strategy here that I use when I meet a business is, if it's not a good fit for ours, or maybe even it is, I often refer them on to my peers. Dave has certainly been at the end of many of my referrals. Now, this leads me on to my second strategy, which is around driving awareness internally. We cannot ignore the fact that preconceived ideas about women-owned businesses exist. In fact, Alanna mentioned this before. And the other challenge is that often in procurement, people within our businesses just love to rinse and repeat when it comes to procuring. I'm really lucky that I work for an organisation with a public inclusion and diversity policy and a sustainability strategy. I often use these tools to help people understand the impact of our purchasing decisions to create social outcomes through partnering with our diverse suppliers. I drive awareness through several channels, from simply presenting that why and the how to an internal team, right through to maintaining an internal web page around what we do and the types of suppliers we engage. This information helps give people ideas on what is possible. This awareness is more general than the matchmaking strategy, but it helps lay the foundations for more targeted conversations. My third strategy is helping build capability and capacity with women-owned businesses. The key assistance I provide here is to talk to them about what we look for in a supplier, whether it be around what we buy, how we buy it, or where we buy it. For example, is it a nationwide arrangement for our network of retail banks, or is it something that we buy from our corporate offices? By providing these insights, businesses can work out if they want to work with us and what they need to do to help make this happen. I also help women-owned businesses through the procurement process. This is not about providing them with an advantage over others. It's around explaining how it works and what to do if they have questions, kind of like their friendly face within the procurement team, because often procurement people are very busy and they've got a lot to deal with. So I'm there at the end of the phone if a women-owned business has a bit of a panic and wants to know some more information about what's going on. Strategy number 4 is sort of the flip side of all of this. I look for ways to incorporate supply diversity into our processes. So you might call this internal capability building. By finding ways to embed supplier diversity in processes, it helps people understand some of the steps that they can take to grow procurement from women-owned businesses. For example, our RFP clauses contain detailed questions about what our suppliers are doing in the social procurement space, and what they might be willing to do to increase procurement if they were to win work with us. This actually acknowledges that small businesses may find it easier to deal with our direct suppliers as a subcontractor, and we're still driving social outcomes through the money we spend. Depending on how close you are to the procurement process will likely affect how prescriptive you need to be when looking at these processes. But it's always worth adding at least one step to remind somebody to at least consider why they shouldn't include a women-owned business in the process, rather than why they should. My final key strategy that I'm going to talk about today is around reporting the great work that we do. That might be the spend information that we include in our annual report, but it could just be the stories about the women-owned business suppliers. These great stories help inspire others and also help to counteract the biases that I mentioned earlier. These are particularly effective when I can provide examples of engagements we've had in industries that are not traditionally women-dominated, for example, in construction. These strategies are those that I have gained from my experience in this space. There are plenty more, and Dave will probably give you some awesome ideas as well. Some may work in some organisations, some may work in others. What I've covered today and how you might use them are, number one, look for opportunities. Become a matchmaker, introducing suppliers to your internal stakeholders, other procurement colleagues, or other colleagues in other organisations. Number two, drive awareness to help people really think about how they are spending the company's money and provide them with options. Number three, help build capacity and capability by letting organisations know how you operate and what you're looking for in a supplier. Number four, look for ways to incorporate women-owned businesses into your procurement processes so people don't just get bogged down with the many other things that they need to consider when sourcing. It helps them remember that they need to think about it. And number five, report on it. However you feel that this works in your organisation, just let them know about the great work that you're doing. If nothing else, remember this. There are many great women-owned businesses out there, and organisations like Femeconomy and We Connect International can help you find them. These businesses, these women-owned businesses, just need a little bit of help from you to connect the dots and work with your organisation. Because as procurement professionals, you're the expert. Thanks, Susan.
Here I go again with my unmuting and unpausing and unvideoing. Yeah, fantastic, Joanne. Yeah, that was really interesting, and it just reminded me that we probably need to put quite a few links either into the chat, or we'll combine them in the email after, because people have mentioned so many things. Of course, we'll need the link to Femeconomy and, you know, We Connect, and just some of those reports that have been mentioned, like the Hild report and even some of the ABS information, because it's, you know, the more information you can arm yourself with when you're having those internal chats that Joanne was talking about, and, you know, basically being that champion of change in your own organization. You know, some of that, for the people who, I'm big into the Myers-Briggs, you know, so the people that are those type T, the thinking analyst type people, they probably want some of that detail. And then the people that are more the people feeling type of people, then those lovely stories, you know, about the different kinds of businesses that, especially when they're non-traditional. And just to, you know, take a point on that, I felt so sorry. I was listening to the radio this morning, and they were interviewing a young female Sparky that was working in, has been working in female construction sites. And I just wanted to ring her up and say, start your own business, love. You know, we can all, you know, we'd love to know more about, I'd love to hire a female electrician or a female plumber rather than some of the other people that I've hired in the past. So yeah, no, that's really inspiring, Joanne, and gave us some really great insights. And of course, you know, we'll probably have some questions. And just to mention about one of the links, I think Amy from EY has shared a link to their report, I think it was. So anyway, have a look at the chat, everyone. And also be sure to put questions, any questions or even comments that you want to raise with any of our speakers so far. So now we have our lucky last, Dave Andrews from Microsoft, and I'm really pleased to welcome him to our discussion today and let him say a few words about what he does. So over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Susan. Joe, Alanna, thank you both for amazing advice so far. I think it's really important that we start these conversations by really grounding everyone in their ability to have an impact here. I want people to do away with the assumption that, yeah, sure, Dave's the procurement leader at Microsoft for ANZ, therefore he can have an impact that I can't have. I think you really need to challenge that assumption, because I want you to think every single day about what you can do to be more inclusive in the way that you operate at work. Particularly as a procurement professional, we've got really great opportunities to drive sustainable change across our community. And I think it starts with us trying to drive change in the things that we can control. If you're a contract admin, what are you doing in talking to leaders of the contracts that you're working on around inclusion? If you're a sourcing professional, how are you including it in your sourcing activity? If you're an SRM professional, how are you making sure the suppliers that you're managing understand your company's commitment to inclusion, and how are they incorporating it in the work that they deliver for you? So what I want to start this conversation with is really a question about mission. So for me, I think it's really important for people to talk about their company's mission, to really understand why supplier diversity is important. So I want to challenge people to put into the chat window their company's mission. And then hopefully we can talk a little bit about this later on. But I'm going to share with you our company's mission. Microsoft's mission is to empower each and every person and organisation on the planet to achieve more. And I can honestly say I've never connected with a company's mission more in any organisation I've worked in than what I do at Microsoft. And it really empowers me to be as passionate as I am about inclusion of all underrepresented groups in our economy, and what I can do to create the change that I want to see. So I think we need to ground ourselves in our company's mission and our priorities, because supplier diversity is extremely important to organisations for a variety of different reasons. Some organisations might be focused on revenue generation. Some organisations might be focused on empowering everyone to achieve more. Some organisations might think it's a priority because it provides them a social licence to operate. And it's really up to you to make the connection to your company's mission, because that's going to be critical to your success on how you influence everyone in the business to go on this journey with us. So when I talk about culture, Microsoft has an amazing culture, a culture that's focused in growth mindset, and it really allows us to challenge everything that we do. I'm really lucky to work in this organisation. I still pinch myself at times with some of the things, some of the conversations I get to be a part of. But when it comes to supplier diversity, I think we can really boil it down to a couple of ways that you could potentially approach it. You can approach it in a system-orientated way, and Joe's mentioned a number of things in relation to that, or you can approach it in an audience-first way. So let's talk about systems first. Systems, processes, policies, tools, technology. How can that really help you in your mission to be more inclusive with the spend in your organisation? I always talk about understanding the policy drivers before understanding technology drivers. A lot of people run to technology and think this technology can help me identify businesses, it can help me source effectively, it can help me drive my inclusive procurement spend. But the fundamentals are, if you don't have the right culture, if you don't have the right policy settings, if you don't have the right audience, the technology is just going to reflect what's existing, and you won't drive the change that you want. So I really challenge you to understand what you can do to change your policies, to create opportunity for inclusive businesses to work in your business, create conversations at a leadership level about your commitment and what steps they're willing to take. Joe's already used an example of making sure you include one women-owned business in your next tender. That's really simple to do. Femeconomy makes it extremely simple to look up on their directory, find a company that has capability and capacity, do your procurement work, understand what they do, where you can fit them in, and provide them an opportunity. The next approach I think we need to talk about is an audience-first approach. And this is really the approach I used at Microsoft when I first started this work. I really went and questioned my stakeholders, my most senior stakeholders across our senior leadership team, and really truly understood what motivated them. I wanted to understand which of those stakeholders I could push to take additional steps in the way that they use the company's money, and which of those stakeholders were willing to invest their time, effort, to change the way the buying behaviour in their organisations. And if there's one thing that we know as procurement professionals, changing buying behaviour is probably the hardest thing that we do, particularly when there's been ingrained relationships, long-term development of impact from businesses in our organisations. So starting with the stakeholder is a really great approach. You're going to find sometimes it can be shocking to talk to stakeholders who you think might be super supportive of this, and they challenge you in a way that you didn't think you'd get challenged. And you might find that advocate that you didn't think existed. But I really challenge you to focus on the needs of the stakeholder first. I think good procurement starts with understanding business need and stakeholder need and aligning the two, and making sure that we can be the connector between both of the aspirations of the business and the stakeholders, and driving inclusive procurement in that way. And I think we've got a really great example with a company called April 5, who's an events management company. We used to use over 100 events management companies at Microsoft in Australia. We whittled that down to 5, really consolidated our spend there. And we also provided opportunity for inclusive businesses, Indigenous businesses, women-owned businesses to be part of that panel. And I remember we had a really frank conversation with the stakeholder about April 5, not wanting to include them in our shortlist. And I worked with the stakeholder many a time. I built a relationship with them. I knew that they wanted to focus on inclusion, and they went to the next phase and actually knocked it out of the park. What they put forward on paper wasn't actually what they could put forward in person, and they became one of our largest suppliers for event management services over the last 3 years. So it was a really great win for us. We spent almost $2.5 million with them last financial year, I believe, or that might have been the year before. So I think an audience-first approach is really critical to understanding how to change behaviour in an organisation. Top-down tone is super important. But I really go back to, what does good procurement look like? How are we identifying suppliers that our stakeholders need at the right time? And how do we know that they're going to provide value for money? The misconception around inclusive businesses being more expensive is absolutely that. My opinion on that is we need to award work to companies based on merit. And I think in the women-owned businesses space, there's a lot of companies that are exceptional at what they do. They provide great value for money, and the only thing that they're missing is opportunity. And we can control that. We can control providing opportunity to women-owned businesses. The maturity of some of the businesses in the women-owned business sector astounded me at first. I got extremely curious, and then I got quite excited because it really enabled us to change our buying behaviour quite quickly. But all that really started with was good procurement, understanding the market, understanding the business need, and matching those two at the right time. I think the last thing that I really want to say is, when we talk about inclusive procurement as a whole, so how are we increasing representation of underrepresented groups in our economy? We really need to ensure that the measurements and mechanisms that we set to measure our impact here are actually driving the change that we want to see. I challenge a lot of procurement professionals around whether spend is a metric that is one that we drive the impact that we want to see. Does it truly drive positive impact in the women-owned business community? Does it drive employment opportunity? Does it foster other businesses? And I really challenge you to think about how you measure your impact in this space, because I've seen a lot of organisations that are held up as leaders in the field of supply diversity who have high spend metrics, but when you really dig deep and understand the businesses that they're dealing with, understand the impact that they're having, does it really link back to that company mission? Does it link to empowering each and every person, organisation on the planet to achieve more? Or does it link to one business making a large sum of money and not the impact that we want to drive change in our society. That's a really philosophical discussion. We can learn a lot from some of the approaches that have happened in the IPP. I know Glenn Johnson's on this call, and he can probably talk to that a lot better than I can. But I think we need to challenge ourselves to understand that supplier diversity or inclusive procurement isn't just something that we should be focusing on with women-owned businesses or with Indigenous businesses or disability enterprises or social enterprises. We should be focusing on this work with every single supplier in our supply chain. So when we're thinking about how we assess social impact, we need to assess that with every supplier, because it's critically important to the success of women-owned businesses that we assess them in the same way that we assess non-women-owned businesses. And I think we have a role to play in establishing clarity on our evaluation criteria, but also assessing people in the same way and not setting unrealistic expectations around employment for women-owned businesses that we don't of non-women-owned businesses. Yes, they're more likely to employ more women, but we shouldn't set that as a measurement of success for us. But what are we setting as measurements of success? If we set it for one business, it should be there for every business. So there's a lot of discussion happening. Joe and I talk about this a lot. How are we assessing every business in our supply chain and their contribution to inclusive procurement? How are we assessing every subcontractor within that supply chain and their contributions to being more inclusive? And I think when we can solve this puzzle and really focus on our whole supply chain, we're really going to see that positive social impact that we really want from this work. So that's it from me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk today, and I think Susan is fastly clicking buttons trying to get her video back on. So I'll fill time while we wait, and I think we're going to move to Q&A.
No worries. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and actually what I'm madly doing besides trying to get myself unmuted and pro-videoed is madly taking notes on what everybody's saying, because, you know, yeah, there are just so many great insights and things that I want to comment on and press a little bit more on. But I also want to direct you to the chat where people are putting in a lot of links and things around different papers. And Alanna has put in information about how, because somebody had raised, Victoria, I think, had raised a question about whether you know, there's documentation or papers around the benefits that working with women-owned businesses brings, so that, you know, and like what's the, I suppose there's that horrible thing to talk about, ROI, which none of us like to talk about, but, you know, obviously there's hard-nosed people in our businesses that, you know, want to know about that, and I think our speakers have been all kind of exploding those misconceptions and myths around the fact that, you know, women-owned businesses aren't as competitive, or they're not as value for money offering, or that, you know, those things that, but it's nice to have the hard facts and data behind it, because I do, you know, it was funny, again, going back to the Myers-Briggs, we've just done it with our team, and we have lots and lots of analyst types in our teams. And I'm sure most procurement and finance teams are like that. So, you know, you do have to bring the right messages to the right people. But I also love Dave's comments around, you know, talking to your stakeholders first, and, you know, getting their feelings aligned, because I don't know about all of you, but those of you, I work in a center-led procurement function, and, you know, we're basically business partners and supporters of our businesses who ultimately have the say on where the money gets spent. And, you know, it's a lot of influencing, a lot of conversations. You know, you don't always win them. It's also kind of that drip approach where you just kind of have to keep mentioning, oh, did you think about putting in a, you know, women-owned business into this, or did you think about putting in, you know, another group, or, you know, whether it's a disability organization or whatever. So, you know, I think all those different strategies are really good, but and something to consider. And you just have to work out for you and your organization, you know, what might work the best. So look, I mean, I think we've kind of, one of my big questions, and we do have a couple of questions coming in, but Alanna, I know, has been answering questions as she goes in the Q&A. So also please check the Q&A or at least I guess that, let me just check that. There was a question around the papers, and she has provided some links and things, but maybe if you provide those in the chat as well. And of course, you can reach out to all of our panelists on LinkedIn and or in the LinkedIn group that we've talked about. But yeah, I just wanted to ask a few questions, I guess. I mean, people have mentioned that intersectionality of the different areas, but Alanna, is there particular arguments that you use when trying to overcome that? Oh God, I'm so tired of the social procurement. Everyone's talking about diversity groups. So is there a particular way that you overcome that kind of bias, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we've just tried to understand where they are focusing their efforts, because women-owned businesses do intersect across all of those diversity drivers. So if I think of our conversation with the New South Wales government, they have a focus on rural and regional procurement, social procurement, as well as SMEs. Queensland is SMEs. So, our members fit under all of those criteria. Indigenous procurement. So what we try and do is understand those procurement frameworks they have in place, and try and connect our women-owned businesses with that. So say, get on the New South Wales panel for marketing and communications. They have supplier forums. It's open all the time as a first step, because, we understand that, procurement professionals are under the pump and that this is an early conversation in Australia. So we do what we can in that way to work with the policies and procedures that they already have. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that, Alanna. And Joanne, I wanted to just ask you about, because I know you've talked before about the real excitement for you, and it came through in your presentation about working with and building the capacity of those women-owned businesses. Have you got any insights, specific things that might help some? Because I know there's some women-owned businesses on the call. I've seen, shout outs from Chocolate on Purpose, and I'm sure there's some other ones there. So yeah, any ideas that you have, or top tips, whatever?
Look, yeah, I mean, a lot of that is around, thank you, Susan. A lot of that is around having a good, solid business that you can make sure that you can supply what it is that you want to supply to an organisation, because procurement's number one role is to make sure we secure supply. So that is really critical, to have a good, solid business. But just a few tiny little tips of observations that I've seen, and that's always ask for feedback. So if you don't, if you're not successful in tender, follow up on the offer fee feedback. Don't be shy. Feedback is gold. So definitely ask for the feedback. The second one is get your website sorted out. It's your resume. It's your online resume. Now, depending on your organisation, depending how it's set up, an organisation like mine is massive. One of the things that I often do is send on the website link to people I'm talking. Sending them lots of information and capability statements. It's difficult. I need to get people's attention really quickly. So get your website sorted out, what it is that you do, what it is that, the size of contracts and your customers, super important. And then the final thing is just let us know who you are. I found that women-owned businesses are often really shy about owning up about being in women-owned businesses. And thankfully, organisations like Femeconomy and We Connect have emerged to help that. But there still seems to be this reluctance of identifying yourself. So get yourself on a list like Femeconomy, or register with, let me know that you're out there. Have a look on my website. I've put the link in the chat there, and let me know what it is that you can supply to me so that I can help you get in and have conversations within Westpac. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks, Joanne. I just wanted to mention something that I've heard all of the speakers talk about, was the maturity and the length of time that a lot of women-owned businesses have been in business. They're not just fly-by-night, turned up yesterday. A lot of them have been in business for 10 years. And as Dave mentioned, about the maturity that he was surprised about. And I was on a webinar yesterday with ICAC, New South Wales ICAC, and they were talking about fraud and corruption. And one of the main things to check is just basic due diligence. Who are the directors? Are there some women directors on the board? Who owned it? Are there some women there? How long has it been in business? And one of the biggest areas for potential fraud is, They've only just started up. That same director's had about 3 or 4 different businesses, you know, that sort of thing. So look, it sounds to me like what I've been hearing from everybody is that the due diligence that you might do as a procurement professional, you're probably going to be really positively surprised by, you know, that maturity and that sophistication and the value for money that the women-owned businesses can offer. But I did have another question for Dave. Early on, you mentioned that, you know, one of the first things you did in your approach was you met with senior stakeholders, and, you know, you identified who were the sort of closet champions, and who were the, you know, people that kind of surprised you that maybe weren't as, you know, didn't put their money where their mouth was, so to speak. But, you know, it did sound like you had a bit of gravitas and a bit of opportunity. So how does it work for someone who's a bit lower down the food chain? You might be just a procurement analyst or a procurement officer, somebody starting out a bit more junior in the role. You know, what do you say to them? We say, well, I can't just go talk to my senior stakeholders.
Well, I'd probably say, Susan, that they can, but I know I'm not in every organisation. So what I always encourage people to do is really think about what you can do in your day job, right? So if you're an analyst, have you used Femeconomy's database to analyse capacity of suppliers against your supplier list and your spend list? I mean, that's one step that everyone can take tomorrow. It's freely available. And if you're a procurement leader or a manager, have you looked at the Femeconomy Gender Equality Toolkit? You can use a lot of the tools there, and I definitely say that I've reviewed that. I spoke to Alanna and Jade when they were putting it together. I think there's some really great tips there. But more importantly, I think at any stage in your procurement life, you can start a conversation about this. So in your next team meeting, why don't you have a conversation about women-owned businesses and how you can support them? Take that up to your leadership team. Talk to them about their approach. If it's a team of 2, have the conversation. If it's a team of 200, also have the conversation. Invite Alanna to come in and give everyone the shocking statistics around women-owned businesses' participation in our economy. Because one of the key statistics, I'm not sure if you said it, Alanna, was around 1% of GDP with women-owned businesses. To me, that's absolutely unacceptable. And we need to do something about it. So at every single stage, you can find a data point, you can find a key message, you can find a story, which should motivate someone in your business to change their buying behaviour. So I challenge everyone just to identify that one thing they can do, something in your control. It doesn't have to be a whole policy change. It doesn't have to be something extremely significant. If I can challenge every single one of you within 6 months to have one more women-owned business in your supply chain, or change in your policy, or at least a conversation with your procurement team, that's what I do. It doesn't have to be big at the beginning. You can start small and grow it out, and you'll be surprised by the momentum you get in your organisation.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for that, Dave. So look, we're getting close to the time, and I know people have to leave and have plenty of other meetings. So just before, I'm going to have a few wrap-up comments to say about our next webinars and things like that. But I just want to give the opportunity to each of our speakers to have a little bit of their last say. So I particularly wanted to ask Alanna about the toolkits that Dave just mentioned. And like, I think you've got a couple of different resources that might be really helpful to people.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning them, Dave. So I've just popped them into the chat. So the toolkit's more if you're doing a large scale change across the organisation. You know, it's probably a change management toolkit that you could use for lots of changes for any diversity procurement initiative. So that's in there. And also there's an example procurement policy for SMEs, which is just a one-page document that you can use as well. So hopefully those things help. But, you know, as Dave said, just start small, start somewhere.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Alanna. Joanne, any last words that you want to share?
Just really quickly, and just kind of mirroring the comments that I made about for women-owned businesses, procurement people, please give feedback to these suppliers as well. I know it can be hard. I know it can be confronting. And, you know, it's an awkward conversation, but these businesses really cherish your honesty, and it's just so helpful because that the way that they can grow. And like, if you're really stuck or you want advice on anything, reach out to me or any of my colleagues in there. I would say Dave, but that's for Dave to kind of volunteer. But certainly, you know, there's been times that I've had to talk to Dave of like, I don't quite know how to deal with this situation. Just get some advice. But yeah, just keep going. Just as Dory says, just keep swimming.
Yeah, thanks for that, Joanne. And I won't preempt Dave's, you know, another big company, just do it, but I'll let him say his last words if he wants to.
I don't know where I go after a quote with Dory, but I'll try. I think my encouragement to procurement professionals is once you dip your toe into this pool, you're going to find a set of equally passionate professionals that are going to lean in and help you like no other area that you found help before. So there's a lot of them on this call. I'm not going to mention them all. A couple of them have been shouted out already, but I personally believe that this is probably the largest growth area for procurement in the next 10 to 20 years. If I was giving you career advice, if you're a procurement lifer like I am, I'd strongly suggest that you build your acumen in this space because it's going to set you apart from other professionals. And it's really going to help you articulate business mission, return on investment, social return on investment, all the things that have been listed in the chat window. So please, the one piece of advice I've got for you isn't just go and do it. I think it's actually, if you don't do it, you're probably doing yourself a disservice for the future of your profession. So challenge yourself to use your growth mindset, learn more about this and take action where you can.
Oh, thank you all. Really, I feel very inspired and I know some of my colleagues from TAFE will probably be on this and hopefully they will also feel inspired. So look, we've only got a couple minutes left. So if you would like to continue this conversation with our colleagues, of course, reach out to them on LinkedIn, but we'd love it if you actually joined our CIPS New South Wales branch LinkedIn group. The link in the QR code will be available at the end of the webinar on the slides. And also our lovely colleague Sophia will be sending out a follow-up email with lots of information on it about, you know, where you can connect and get more information. So I'd just like to say thank you so much to everyone for your participation today and joining us today. And of course, particularly to our wonderful panelists. They were really inspiring and I just found it really, really informative and helpful. So thank you for that. Now, everyone else, before you leave, just take a few minutes at the end to complete our post-webinar survey. That's going to pop up at the end of the webinar. That's really appreciated because we just mentioned feedback, how important it is for everyone. And we really take your feedback on board as well. And Sophia will be sending out a post-webinar email with links to the YouTube channel where this presentation, the webinar, will be available. And we'd also like to invite all of you to join our next webinar that is being hosted by the CIPS New South Wales branch. That's on the 30th of August. I think it's next Monday. Monday week, sorry, at 12 noon, and that's Australian Eastern Standard Time. And that will be on current legal issues in procurement. And that has Scott Alden as our guest speaker, who I've heard on many occasions, and he's also, like our wonderful speakers today, a really engaging and dynamic. So that's fantastic. So once again, I'd just like to say very much thank you all for joining us today and have a lovely and safe rest of your day. And if you're in lockdown, good luck and stay safe, particularly. So bye for now.